welcome everybody to this event about Belarus. I'm Joanna Hossa, the Deputy Director of the Wider Europe Program at ECFR, and we are very happy to have you with us. We are very keen to keep Belarus on the agenda, even if it has disappeared largely from headlines now, but the crisis is not over. Lots of interesting things happening in Belarus, and we are very happy to have three excellent speakers today with us. Our ECFR's Andy Wilson, Pavel Slunkin, our new visiting fellow from Belarus, and Dorota Dlouchy from EEAS in Brussels, and Sylvie Kauffmann, who will be chairing today's debate, our council member and also from Le Monde. And just a few technical issues. We will have the introductions for up to half an hour, and then half an hour or longer, depends on how long it takes, for the questions and answers session. And you can either raise your hand with the raise your hand button that I'm sure you already know, or you can put them in the chat and Sylvie will ask you to speak or choose your questions from the chat. So I think that's it for the introduction, and I leave it to Sylvie to start the debate.
Thank you very much, Joanna, and welcome to all of you. I'm a journalist at Le Monde, and I'm also council member at ECFR, and I'm very, very happy to chair this session because something that some may think that Belarus has gone off screen for us in Western Europe, but I don't think it's the case. At least at Le Monde, we still follow it closely. We consider it a very important issue, and I must say every weekend, one of the first things I do is to tune in to the dozen of Twitter lines that I follow on Belarus to see what's going to happen. And I know, in fact, what to expect, because I know it's going to be either the pensioners or the women, and Sunday, obviously, it will be everybody. And unfortunately, there are those ugly scenes of police brutality and repression. And I think we are all very much impressed here by what's happening and by the courage and the perseverance of Belarusian people. There's only one movement in recent history that I can compare it to. It's the Hirak in Algeria. It's for more than a year, every Friday, a huge amount of protesters and from all, from the whole civil society went out on the streets, and what they achieved was to have the president, their old president, resign, but what they wanted was to break the system. That was their main demand, and they haven't achieved it yet. And I must say their movement was just cut off by the COVID-19. So I hope people in Belarus have more luck in a way, but situation looks pretty stuck at the moment. So we are going to see first with Andy Wilson, who is Senior Policy Fellow at ECFR and who is really an expert on Eastern European studies and particularly Ukraine. What has happened, in fact, since the August 9 presidential election, and what has been achieved. And then I will ask Pavel Slunkin, who is a visiting fellow at ECFR and who is really an expert on Belarus related issues and on Russia. What can we expect? And finally, with Dorota Dlouchy-Suliga of EEAS. She's Deputy Head of Division for Eastern Partnership Bilateral Relations. What can the EU do if it can do something? So Andy, we'll start with you. And then when the three of you have finished, we will, of course, open the floor to your questions. So please, Andy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sylvie. Thank you, Joanna. Thank you all for coming. On technical issues, I should probably say my computer crashed about 20 minutes ago. I really hope it doesn't happen again. But Joanna will deal with it if it does. Where are we now? Well, the last major demonstration was on Sunday, 25th of October. That was the day that the People's Ultimatum expired. So you had a rise in numbers on the streets because of that. But it was kind of tempting to see that as a last hurrah. Since then, in November, the police have been much more forceful. They've used live ammunition, stun grenades. The numbers being arrested has rocketed up again to levels first seen in August. 1,000 arrested in the first 2 Sundays of November. Protesters are being threatened with years in prison rather than the normal 15 days. So this is never the end. It's not even the denouement, but it was tempting to think this was the end of Act 1, as it were, that 4 months of protests were coming to an end. But even there, I think protesters have been extraordinarily persistent and innovative. You've had a change of tactics towards march of neighbours instead. These kind of decentralised marches in the suburbs rather than everybody concentrating in the same place and being much easier to arrest. In fact, that necessitated another 300 arrests last Sunday. So protests are still going on. You see innovative efforts in other areas. This strategy to de-anonymise the police, which began with publishing their names and addresses and so on a couple of months ago, has now expanded to a group called BY-Pol, a small number of people who've left the police force and are now in exile, but the fact that they exist is significant. They set up EKRP.org. Keeps crashing when you try and visit it. I think that's the authorities. A single book for registering crimes. That's EKRP in Russian. Where the point is to upload evidence of police brutality. There's a solidarity fund, bysol.org, which has raised considerable amounts of money. So all of this is hugely impressive. 4 months of protest is unprecedented. Even on official figures, 18,000 have been arrested, but there was a leak of Interior Ministry documents to one of the exile groups, Latushka's People's Anti-Crisis Management. And that was 30,000 arrests by mid-November. So we're above 30,000 now. That's an extraordinary number. Per capita, it's easily the most severe repression anywhere in Europe since the end of the Cold War. If you take the suppression of solidarity in Poland, Belarus's neighbour, for comparison, that was 10,000 people, and that was under conditions of martial law. But also in the 80s, you had 700,000 people leaving Poland. So if the regime does consolidate in Belarus, that's the kind of scale of the challenge that we might be facing. And per capita, Belarus only has a quarter of the population of Poland. So the percentage numbers are huge. So there's a huge need for social and economic support for all these people, human rights investigations. But conversely, I think it makes the idea of some kind of transition process very hard to conceive. The scale of culpability on the government side extends way beyond Lukashenko himself, partly deliberately to make sure everybody is in the same net of responsibility for extreme brutality. So everybody sinks or swims together. So it's hard to imagine Lukashenko going when he would be criminally liable. It's hard to imagine an in-house or in-regime transition, because it would be to another group of people who would also be culpable for what's happened. So that's a big problem, and I'll leave Pavel to discuss the future. But it's very unclear what role Lukashenko can actually play going forward. And it's very unclear what role Russia might want him to play. If we stick with the Polish example, currently he's Jaruzelski, doing Moscow's dirty work, suppressing protests instead of that being done by outsiders, I guess. But that's a short-term job. Even in Poland in the 80s, it was a short-term job. Longer term, it might be more appropriate to have someone like a Gomulka. Those of you who know Polish history, Gomulka was the Polish leader who was brought back in 1956. Soviet forces invaded Hungary, but they didn't invade Poland because Gomulka was able to satisfy all sides. He was friendly enough to Moscow, but he had a domestic power base as well. And longer term, that seems to be, even on Russia's perspective, what is more likely to be a kind of role that would steer somehow out of the crisis. Or alternatively, Moscow might want some equivalent of the East German leaders of the 1940s, who had spent most of the war in Moscow and were very happy to see most of the economy physically shipped eastwards in the late 40s. So the analogy here would be someone who would allow Russian influence in the Belarusian economy to grow going forward. So even though Lukashenko looks secure temporarily, the sheer extent of the brutality that he's presided over will be a problem even as early as next year. I don't think anything other than a fake political dialogue seems possible given what's happened. I'll finish there.
Thank you very much, Andy. Just one question on those 30,000 something people arrested. Is that the total of people who have been arrested since August 9 at any given time, or is it the number of people who are detained now? Because I understand a lot of people are sentenced to a 2-week jail sentence, but I mean, do you have precise numbers? Yeah.
Yes, the latter. So in and out. Most people got 15 days, as you say. So the total number the total accumulated total.
Okay. And some people get 15 days several times, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Well, Pavel, tell us how you see where do we go from now, please?
Okay, so many analysts describe the situation in Belarus, the current situation in Belarus, as a political crisis. Some of them say that this is a revolution happening. Some of them call it an internal conflict. Some of them even pay attention that Lukashenko has managed to stabilize the situation a little bit since August. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that this is not just a crisis. We are now witnessing a completely new stage in the country's history, and it is a prologue to the future of Belarus. The ending of this story, the ending of this crisis is still open, and it's being written now by the Belarusian people, by the current authorities, and by foreign partners of Belarus. So that's why I would suggest you to look back and see what changes have taken place in the country over the past 115 days. This will be just several observations. In reality, there are many more of them, but you will see that we're now talking about two different Belaruses, Belarus before and Belarus now. So Belarus has lost its stability. which the regime was so proud of. I'm talking both on the internal stability and also on the image of donor of stability in the region, which has been built by Belarusian MFA and by Belarusian government since 2014, starting with the Ukrainian crisis. The image of neutral platform for negotiations has been ruined. Lukashenko has lost his legitimacy, both international and what's more important is domestic legitimacy. In May this year, it would have sounded unrealistic, but now it's a fact. It's not known whether he won the elections earlier in 2010 or 26. There have been no fair elections in the country for a long time, and sociology has been destroyed. But we can definitely say that his opponents inside the country, now they know that they have the majority. This was not the case before, and it allowed the authoritarian regime to remain stable and remain monolithic. The country has faced a large population outflow. There is no exact actual data, but these are tens of thousands of people who left Belarus for humanitarian reasons after the events of August. There are no mass strikes by enterprises. There were in August, but there are no now. There are several government companies and institutions where individual employees are announcing that they are going on strike, but its percentage of the total number of employees remains insignificant. The economic collapse has not occurred till the moment, though it was expected by several analysts, economic analysts. The exchange rate of local currency remains stable so far. Salaries are still paid on time, although some macro and microeconomic indicators look really bad. The country has a record for the number of political prisoners, and I already told you the number. If earlier, after the elections, the number, those who passed through criminal cases, was estimated at ones or tens, now it's hundreds of people. More than 31,000 of people have passed through prisons in the past 4 months, and this number is constantly growing. The institution of law in the country has been destroyed. It has become a punitive tool for dealing with any kind of political dissent. I will read, just for example, the extracts from the official indictment records. Once again, I draw your attention to the fact that these are extracts from real documents of real court decisions. So the quotation, he did not participate in the mass action, but mentally he supported the protesters, guilty. He had an agreement with a lawyer. This confirms his intention to break the law, guilty. She expressed her protest with red and white marshmallow. This sounds funny, but she was called guilty. This story is about a woman who took a photograph at a store with a white, red, white marshmallow. You know that white, red, white is the national flag color. And such protocols, they appear daily. Court sessions usually last from 5 to 10 minutes. The main witnesses are police officers whose faces are hidden by balaclavas. They witness online, not personally, and they also appear in courts under fake names. Defense witnesses are often simply denied the right to speak. So next point, several protesters have been killed in the country since August. There are multiple videos of these murders, but criminal cases were never opened. On the protests still continue. They're no longer as massive as they used to be, but they still involve tens of thousands of people every week. Although all these people are very well aware of the risks they are taking, these protests are still, in spite of everything, remain exclusively peaceful. For the first time in a long time, the Belarusian opposition has a figure that is acceptable to all, precisely because its function is primarily technical. The figure is Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. Another point, that audio recordings of telephone calls between officials from Lukashenko's closest circle are now regularly leaked to the internet. We don't know who is doing this, but only a very limited number of people have access to such materials. And these recordings themselves provide an excellent indication of the atmosphere that prevails among the people in power. The regime has not yet shown clear signs of destruction. The monolithic nomenclature and the vertical of power are still preserved. The power structures like army, police, special services are performing their assigned tasks, and the propaganda is functioning. So a few words on the policy track, on the foreign policy track. Belarus has lost the ability to balance between Russia and Western countries, which it was doing since 2014. And for the sake of maintaining Russia's support, Minsk is now pursuing an aggressive anti-Western policy. The de facto only international partner of Belarus at the moment is Russia. Lukashenko has recently met either Putin or his subordinates. Over the past, in comparison, like over the past 4 months, Tikhanovskaya has held more international meetings at the highest and high level with Western partners that Lukashenko has had in 26 years of his presidency. Russia has not provided the economic assistance to Belarus for which it was asked by Belarusian authorities. Contracts for the next year on gas prices have not yet been concluded, and this is being used by Russia as an element of pressure on Lukashenko. The level of support for Russia among the population of Belarus is declining. The main factor, we suggest that the main factor is Moscow's support for the current government. However, it's not yet known to what extent this trend will be permanent and deepening. If the announced approach to progressively building up sanctions pressure on Belarus will continue, it would be the toughest sanctions that have ever been imposed on it. And another point, the last one here, is that Belarus left the agenda. It was already mentioned of the world media. It doesn't have so much attention as it had in August. But the situation has worsened and the international attention has generally diminished. And now a little bit of focus, just some points. Internal stability will not completely disappear. Even if people start protesting in the streets, their discontent will take on new forms. This affects and will continue to influence the quality of government management, also including the outflow of professionals from state government or organizations. Belarus and Russia relations will remain a key external factor in Lukashenko's preservation of power. With the high degree of probability, the volume of existing contradictions on many issues between sides, between Minsk and Moscow, will lead them to conflict situation in the future. Lukashenko will sooner or later try to seek contacts with the European Union and the USA. It's not yet clear whether Russia is secretly pushing Lukashenko to resign. I guess it expects him first to carry out reforms that are beneficial to Moscow, and it exposes those reforms as a condition for further economic support. Russia's goal is that his resignation should be the result of these reforms and not vice versa. In Belarus economy, if Belarus economy keeps its stability, and if the deterioration of people's level of life proceeds little by little, then national strikes would be unlikely. If they went, if the collapse of the economy will happen, then they are much more likely. And the position of the EU and the United States is important now. Though Western countries don't have those kind of impact that Moscow has, they can't directly influence the situation in Belarus. But what's important, they should already think of preparing for the transit period. It will come sooner or later. Russia has already big plans for this transit. And I will just end with a perfect phrase once said by Winston Churchill after the fight in El Alamein that was won by British forces. Now it's not the end, it's not even the beginning of the end, but perhaps it's the end of the beginning. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Pavel. I have also a couple of questions for you before we turn to Dorota. Those audio records that you mentioned of officials' conversations that have been leaked, I suppose, what do they say? You said it reflects the state of mind of the officials. So what is that state of mind?
It's like the atmosphere, how they talk to each other, what they say each other. I'm talking, the latest one was the conversation between the advisor to the president and the press secretary of the president. And the press secretary says that after the previous leakage where her telephone calls were recorded, where she discussed how they go to different neighborhoods and detain people there. themselves, like the VIP persons, that after that Lukashenko didn't contact her. And she says that she has COVID and that she's afraid not to go to the meeting with the president. And she asked the advisor that he will explain to the president why she's not present. Then they discussed the situation with the head of the administration of the president, that he's now on the ventilator. And still that he's now on the ventilator, but when this meeting took place, he was present before. He was ill, he knew he was ill, but he didn't even put a mask. And after that, she thinks that she got COVID after sitting right to him. So like the atmosphere, how they talk, how people discuss what is happening, and they discuss it on Sunday. And I think that this is also an example of how authorities break their own legs by their decisions. They turn off the internet on Sundays, and they have not to use the Telegram for conversations like that if they don't have a usual telephone conversation from their working place. They have to use the usual mobile phones, and this leads to leak those kind of conversations.
Okay. and the other question I had was about Lavrov's visit, recent visit to what came out of it.
It's hard to say. What Russia did, or what Russia does, is that they say publicly what Belarus wants to hear. They say that all of the protests are inspired by Western countries, that Tikhanovskaya and all of these opposition guys that sit in Vilnius or in Warsaw, they are also manipulated by Western politicians, by Western funds. That all of this are just the preparation of the color revolution. But the most important things, they happen when they talk non-publicly. And one main phrase from this visit was said when Lavrov met Lukashenko. He said that Mr. Putin sends you regards. He remembers what you discussed in Sochi on the 14th of September, and Russia remains with those
months,
with everything they discussed and with everything that Lukashenko promised, we suppose. So I would say that this is the main phrase that we have publicly.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Dorota, Dlouchy, what can we expect from the EU, and what has it done so far, and what can we expect?
Thank you, Sylvia, and thank you for the previous speakers for interesting remarks. On the EU side, I think it's important to underline that we have shared consensus, full consensus among EU member states on Belarus since very beginning. In August, during pandemic time, holidays in Europe, some people were thinking that the choice of the election date was also because of the calendars in the West. It's always better to do it in the summer if you want to trick elections. But already in August, we had meetings of foreign ministers and European Council only on Belarus. Of course, it was Eastern countries that were putting this on the European agenda, but all member states supported it. And we have full consensus on both assessment of the situation, on the EU response, on the steps that Belarus would have to take so we change our policies, and on the EU's role. On the assessment is clear. We believe that those elections were not free, not fair, rigged. Then the violence is unacceptable. I think it's quite clear. On the response, of course, sanctions are on the main pages in media. But I think that more important on the response is our financial support. Financial support to civil society and independent media and victims. And we have strengthened the support immediately already in August via Most European Endowment for Democracy at that time. But now we are also using different other channels. We are supporting civil society organizations outside Belarus, mostly Vilnius, Warsaw, but also in the country. And most of the money and our support goes to players, stakeholders on the ground, even though it's not easy, it's difficult to reach them. It's also, we are mindful of not endangering them by being marked as recipients of the Western support, and then so that they are attacked by authorities. And actually, this financial support for civil society is important because we do it since 90s. Many people that now are very close to Mrs. Tichanovskaya, Mr. Latushko, they were on Erasmus, they were recipients of different grants, different projects with the EU, regional, with member states. And we see that over years, this support built civil society to some extent, and we contributed to the awakening to some extent of people of Belarus now. So we will continue this, and we will actually in coming days provide information on new packages. On the sanctions, we have 2 packages now, and as you know, because at the last Foreign Affairs Council it was announced, we are working on the 3rd package of the sanctions in line with the gradual approach. I think it's important to remember that we are not a court, we are not judges. So sanctions, it's not punishment for the crimes. We don't have this role, and we cannot be a court. But of course, there are clear criteria for sanctioning people because of the falsification and violence. We have already sanctioned. I sometimes feel that people do not, of course, look at the precise lists of sanctioned people. We've sanctioned representatives of a number of institutions. So starting with Monde, Ministry of Interior, but also judges of Constitutional Court, also prosecutors, also press people of the president. So we are targeting different ways that the authorities of Belarus are clamping down on civil society and on the movement in the country. And of course, we bring it to the issue of the human rights violations to international institutions, in particular to OSCE, where Belarus is a member. I think it's very important to remember Belarus is the only country in the Eastern Partnership where we don't have a bilateral agreement with the EU. So Belarus has no commitments vis-a-vis the EU, of course. That's why we are pushing so much OSCE agenda. And I think that a report published under Moscow mechanism, which was under OSCE, which was also triggered by some member states, by Professor Bednarek, which was published last month. It was an extremely good report, while evidencing violence, falsification of election, and so on, and providing a number of recommendations for international community, and we are following them now. As previous speaker said, we don't have such leverage with Belarus as Russia does. Our economic relations are not strong. As I said, we don't have even an agreement. The bilateral envelope of support to Belarus, annual one, is 30 million euros in past years because of the non-democratic regime that is in place since 90s. This bilateral envelope of 30 million was going mostly to civil society anyway, to local organizations. So we scaled down and fully stopped political contacts with authorities at the political level. We stopped also cooperating with central authorities, but there's not much that we can take away in terms of financial resources because we were not cooperating closely with the regime. And yeah, the less connections, the less leverage and the less response that we can have. But I still believe that in particular, and coming back to the example of Andrew Wilson, as he was talking about the country I used to know the best, so my own country, Poland. It took some years for solidarity since 1981, or even earlier with the Committee of the Defense of the Workers. I have to translate from Polish in my mind, which was the 70s, to come to 1989. It takes years. During this time, West also didn't have much of leverage in Poland. we use the same tools, so financial support, international pressure, and it worked. I'm sorry it does not work very quickly. We are working within the rule of law. We cannot bring military to Belarus, of course. But we are also working on future. As Pavel was talking about the future, European Council tasked European Commission with providing the economic program for democratic Belarus. And we are working on such a program. The program that would be only, of course, available if democracy will come back to Belarus. We are working on the basis of the whole toolbox that we have, so including macro-financial assistance, which could be then given to Belarus if they were democratic, more active presence of European banks on the ground, bigger envelope of financial support, and so on. In future, also visa liberalization and so on. So we are working on this, but we don't see, of course, at this point, possibility to engage with this government, which we feel that has no democratic legitimacy.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm not sure the comparison with Poland is, as you say, in terms of time frame, is very encouraging, because if I remember, CORE, the Workers' Committee, was created in 1976, right?
Yes.
And Solidarność eventually won in 89.
Yes, I hope it will be shorter for Belarus, as we learned from experiences.
We all hope it will be shorter. Maybe now, nowadays things usually accelerate, so we can hope. But it is true. I mean, thank you for making it clear. The EU really lacks leverage. That's a fact. That's a fact. And I mean, helping civil society is definitely an important tool, but we'll see. I have a first question from Alexander Grodzowski, who is asking on the chat box, at what stage, or maybe that means to what extent, the monthly joint military drills, which have been decided after the Sochi meeting, will have an impact on the internal security of Belarus. So maybe this is a question for Pavel. You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry. We Belarusians are already muted for some time, so sometimes it happens. We should pay attention to the time when the information on those military exchanges were announced. This was when there are hundreds of people protested in the city center. And I would say that this was not the real decision that they were going to really make them regular. This was just to show Russia's support, and it was asked by Lukashenko. He even asked the Organization of Security Treaty, the CSTO organization that is an analog of NATO in CIS countries, to somehow help the authorities of Belarus if the situation will be uncontrollable. So I would say that this is not more about de facto what they are going to do or what they are doing, because we don't have any proofs that they really take place, those military exercises, or that they will take place. It is all about to show that Belarus is backed by Russia.
Yeah, I could agree with that. It's basically background intimidation. If you think what happened to Yanukovych, the Ukrainian president, in February 2014, he had basically maxed out his repressive capacity, and that was clear to the protesters as well as his supporters. So you've had a concerted effect to show the opposite. So this notorious video of Lukashenko in a helicopter is a direct reference to Yanukovych fleeing Kiev on a helicopter. He's not fleeing, he's very much staying. And he has not just more domestic capacity for oppression than Ukraine, but it's potentially backed by Russia if necessary. So can take it as far as it goes. Plus, it's an attempt to kind of influence the protest atmosphere to discourage some by introducing the fear of Russian intervention. Whether it's numerical or not, it's designed to intimidate protests.
Thank you very much. I have several questions. I have one from Lukasz Kulesa to Andrew and Pavel, and it's about the constitutional reform process. Could you tell us what is your understanding of the timetable of this process as planned by the regime, and particularly in light of the of Lukashenko's remarks at hospital number 6 the other day, right, when he said that he hinted that he might go, if I remember well. So Andy, why don't you start, and then Pavel?
Well, Pavel could probably say more about the timetable per se. I think we can say something about the structure, that you have a lot of candidates for the kind of interlocutors in the process, all of whom are pro-regime parties that previously existed or that have been created since August. Some of whom are also pro-Russian, but not necessarily both. And you can see both competing for resources, either regime and or Russian sponsorship. It'd be interesting if the two actually diverged. Some pro-Russian organizations became critical of Lukashenko. It is possible. So what you have is basically a competition to be the fake partners in the process. Right? Nothing more than that. None of these people are real, but there is a competition for who gets to take part. I can't imagine the government allowing the real opposition anywhere near any open and meaningful process. So it will be staged managed entirely.
Pavel, do you agree?
I
would just describe the situation. We have 3 possible scenarios. Like the people's scenario, what was supported also by Tikhanovskaya and Laltushka's team, is just first for elections and then all forms without Lukashenko and without the current authorities. The second one is by Moscow's scenarios. It means that Lukashenko is dependent on Moscow and does what Moscow needs. So it's demonopolizing the power from Lukashenko's hands to some pro-Russian politicians, building pro-Russian infrastructure in the country. And the third scenario, which I don't even believe it's real, if it exists. We only hear about it, but we don't know if they really have plans to do like something real on it. The authorities, constitutional reform, they are talking that the ideas will be announced in January, when this kind of big meeting of all the guys that support the current authorities will unite, and then will vote for the ideas of Lukashenko, how this constitutional reform should look like. But we don't know either what kind of changes it has. We even don't know if it would be the changes for less power of Lukashenko or for more power of Lukashenko. And we even don't know the timing for the constitutional reform. It could happen like in 10 years, in 20 years, or they will discuss that and they understand that they just don't want, like the people will vote against it. So it is all about Lukashenko's will. And he said so many times during his 26 years rule that he doesn't need this power, that we do understand that he really needs it very much, and that he wouldn't like to lose any part of it. And as we know, authoritarian leaders, they never change. They never democratize. How you say it in English? Democratize or yeah, they never democratize themselves.
Yeah.
They're just beginning tougher. They're just becoming tougher and tougher. Not vice versa. Only because of pressure of streets. That is not the case right now, I would say. There is, but this pressure from the street is not so strong as it was in August. And the pressure from Russia. But if we talk about the pressure from Russia, this doesn't mean that this will change the situation in Belarus the way the people of Belarus would like it to be. So this is, I hope I answered the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. I think I guess there's also a problem with the degree of trust that Moscow can have in Lukashenko, because, you know, he's been saying so many diverse or contradictory things over the years that I suppose even Putin must be a little bit worried. Dorota, I think that's for you, from Tony van der Togt. Is there any way that the EU, together with Russia maybe, could somehow pressure the regime to have a real dialogue or a negotiation process with people linked to the coordination council? Yeah.
Maybe first the part with Russia. I don't think that with Russia it would be possible. You may remember that in August, just after the elections, Russia was a bit lost. They were not sure how to react what was happening. And it took them some days to go fully behind Lukashenko. And since this moment, I don't think that there is a space to come to common language on Belarus between us and Russia in our assessment and in our reactions. Whether we can push them to have dialogue with Coordination Council. As you know, Lukashenko started criminal investigation against Coordination Council and pushed most of the people out of the country or imprisoned. I don't think that he's ready to enter such a dialogue, because in his mind, entering in such a dialogue would mean concession, that he's ready to go for elections or to give up the power. And he's not ready to make such a concession. But entering the dialogue with the Coordination Council and with the demands of the Coordination Council, actually for such a change would mean that he is ready to leave. And we are not at this stage. Of course, OSCE can play a role, and there was another question I saw on chat. I'm sorry, Sylvie, to take it.
Go ahead.
About OSCE role and Swedish presidency, chairmanship in office. I think Sweden will try to be more active, and I also count on OSCE being more active. This crisis happened when OSCE was headless, without Secretary General, without main bodies, without head of audio, and so on and so on. And now we had nominations. We'll have Swedish presidency very much interested in the region, chairmanship in office. So there is some hope that they will be more active on human rights in particular, and Sweden will try to reach out to Minsk more, and maybe even travel there and discuss with both opposition and Lukashenko. But as I said, as I believe that for him, entering into dialogue would mean already deciding to resign, that this will not happen.
Yeah, that's clear. There's another question to you, Dorota, from Lukasz. When will the EU's economic plan be published, and how do you see the future of Belarus in Eastern Partnership activities?
On economic plan, I don't know yet, so it's coming. We are working on this, but I cannot say when it will be published. We will be discussing now, the Commission, because the Commission is on the lead, not the European External Action Service, as this is economic part. They have money, we are diplomatic service. We will be discussing this with member states in upcoming meetings, but definitely we will not publish this in December. So we'll discuss now with member states the main elements. as for Eastern Partnership, we want to keep Belarusian because we believe that Eastern Partnership is mostly for the Belarusian citizens. And it's an important way to work on different things, from climate change, from environment, river pollutions, and so on and so on. So we would like them to stay, but what we have said clearly in the Council conclusions on Belarus, which were quite comprehensive, which we published on 12th of October, we are ready to engage with Belarus on not political level, so not ministerial and higher, with experts, with administrators, in working groups on dedicated to, I don't know, nuclear energy and so on, for to mention some subjects. So we are trying to balance the interest of the people with the political urgency. Same as actually with how we approach the sanctions and everything that we do now with Belarus. We don't want negative impact on population, which is already under a lot of strain from COVID and from the political situation. But we want to send a strong message to the authorities that we don't accept what they are doing.
Okay, I'm going to try to group the questions because there are still a few and we don't have much time left. About Teodorovskaya, yeah, that's from Joanna. How do you see her role? Is she following a good strategy? And so that goes with Stanislav's question, who points out that Biden invited her for inauguration, and would the EU plan for the same for the Eastern Partnership Summit? That might be a bit tricky, but maybe Dorota will tell us. So on the Pavel, do you want to say a few words about Teodorovskaya?
I would say that to somehow analyze if the deeds of Tikhanovskaya team are okay, are fine, are good or not, we should understand the margins, like the opportunities that she has. It would be better if she works as a politician in Belarus, but we understand that if she stays in Belarus, she won't be free anymore. So she had to leave. Is it good or bad? It's bad, but this was a step that she should have done. The other one, like, she communicates well with the Western partners, but the Western partners doesn't have so much leverage, as we already said, as Moscow has. But is it the fault of Tikhanovskaya or her team? No, she would like to have more contacts with Moscow, more contacts with Russia, but she is not seen by Moscow and Russia as a partner. So I would say that in the margins that she has, her team and she herself, they are doing perfect. They are doing very well. But if we just like compare to the ideally how it could be, then it won't be so good, I would say, because it would be much better if she could communicate with Moscow, if she could have contacts with some level of politicians in Russia, if she could stay in Russia, in Belarus, and not be in prison. So it would be better. But in the market that she has, it's pretty nice. Mm-hmm. And it was asked on the if she's supported by Belarusian people. When she participated in elections, she didn't want to participate. She is just a wife of a guy that wanted to participate, and she did it just because she wanted to support him somehow. And there was a joke that even in the elections, that if we put in the ballot Lukashenko and a chair, then a chair will win those elections. So her role was more technical, symbolic. Her role was someone, but not Lukashenko. So, and now its role is also symbolic. Like, she won those elections, and now she's supported not as a politician, but just as a symbol. And it's a technical leader that could lead us, that could make fair elections.
Yeah, she obviously has no political ambitions of her own, but she's handling that very uncomfortable role, in fact, quite well, I think. Yeah. Andy, you want to say something?
Yes, we should remember that she's not a professional politician, and that's part of her appeal. She didn't run for election with a program or a manifesto. She simply ran on a program of anti-Lukashenko mood and free and fair elections. If not this time, then next. So that's still her basic appeal, and that is good because it helps her function as a symbol. It's a very low barrier to entry. It makes it easy for everybody to opt in and support her as a kind of civic symbol. When she tries to be more proactive, it's not always successful, as with the People's Ultimatum. Whether we recognise her or not, I don't know how radical we want to be, but we are in limbo. One downside of Lukashenko's self-inauguration was that pushed a lot of EU member states in saying we didn't recognise him, including Germany. So where we are after that is kind of unclear. Stas's question about Ukraine. Yes, as Pavel said earlier, Belarus is no longer playing a foreign policy balance game. It's not a security donor in the region anymore. In some ways, it's the opposite. So it's very noticeable that it picked a fight with Ukraine in the last couple of weeks for no other apparent reason than just to please Russia. In Kiev and in Lviv, there had been protests outside Belarusian embassy, Belarusian consul, including a vigil by activists. So Belarus complained that this was a threat to the lives and security of their embassy officials, which was vastly exaggerated, rather indicative of kind of the artificial nature of the row. But that long term is a real security minus for the region if Ukraine has to cope with two aggressive neighbours. Belarus not being aggressive in the same way, but so far de facto Belarusian neutrality has been a big asset for Ukraine, and if that's lost, then their security situation is much more precarious.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're just approaching the end of our session, so maybe Dorota, I'll give you the last word about what the EU position is regarding Tiodorovskaya and whatever you want to say that you haven't said yet, maybe. Mm-hmm.
Answering to the question on the summit invitation, we don't have date for the summit yet. Let's start with this because we would like to have it, or a president of the European Council would like to have it in physical presence, and this depends on the COVID situation, of course. What is clear, we don't invite people on the sanctions list to the summits, so it's clear whom we don't invite. As far whom we invite, I think it's too early to say, but I would doubt. As for recognition of Tiodorovskaya and Coordination Council, Coordination Council was not elected by any elections, and we are here calling for the free elections in Belarus. We see Coordination Council as an important partner to discuss the developments, to also discuss our assistance and so on, but we don't see it as a Belarusian government. That's quite clear. And as for in other cases where we didn't recognize elections and the head of state, then we recognize as a head of state a person that constitutionally was next, which is of course not the case of Svetlana Tichanovskaya. But many member states and also my direct boss, High Representative, met with Tichanovskaya, and we are ready to talk with her, but we don't recognize her as a president of Belarus at this moment.
Okay, well, I have to thank you, the three of you, and the audience for your questions. That was extremely interesting, and I think we have to do it again sometime soon, Joanna, because as you said, we have to follow closely what's going on, even if it takes a long time, as Dorota hinted. Okay, yes. Thank you so much, all of you, and have a good weekend.